Psalm 91 begins with a sentence that is easy to overlook, yet it quietly governs everything that follows. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of Almighty. Notice what comes first. Not the promise of protection, not the angels, not the deliverance, but the decision to dwell. This is not poetic filler. It is psychological, philosophical, and deeply practical. Scripture is telling us that God's protection is not random, it is relational. It is connected to where you choose to place your inner life. To dwell means more than to visit. It implies residence, consistency, and intention. Many people want the benefits of faith without the discipline of presence. They want shelter without staying under the roof. But protection, in the biblical sense, flows from alignment. When the mind, the heart, and the will are oriented toward God, something shifts internally. Anxiety loosens its grip. Fear loses its authority. The soul settles. This is not mysticism, it is order. When the human spirit is aligned with its source, stability follows. Psychologically, what we dwell on shapes us. Thoughts repeated become beliefs. Beliefs rehearsed become behavior. If your mind dwells constantly on threat, loss, and uncertainty, your nervous system lives in a state of siege. But when you dwell on God, on His character, His faithfulness, His sovereignty, your inner world changes. Calm replaces chaos, perspective replaces panic. This is why Scripture consistently calls us to remember, to meditate, to abide. God is not trying to control us. He is trying to stabilize us. Philosophically, Psalm 91 challenges the modern illusion of control. We build systems, plans, and safeguards, yet we remain fragile. The psalm does not condemn preparation, but it exposes false security. True refuge is not found in what we manage, but in whom we trust. The secret place is not a physical location. It is a posture of dependence. It is the quiet decision to say, I am not self-sustaining, I need God. That admission is not weakness, it is wisdom. When the psalm speaks of abiding under God's shadow, it paints an image of closeness. Shadows only fall where proximity exists. You cannot live in someone's shadow from a distance. This is intimate language. It suggests a God who is near, attentive, and actively involved. Protection here is not mechanical. It is personal. It is the natural outcome of closeness, the way a child instinctively moves closer to a parent in moments of danger. This also reframes how we understand faith in daily life. Dwelling in God's presence is not limited to moments of prayer or worship. It extends into decisions, reactions, and values. It is choosing integrity when compromise is easier. It is choosing trust when fear is louder. It is choosing obedience when the outcome is uncertain. Each choice becomes an act of residence, a way of saying, this is where I live. And here is the quiet power of this truth. When you dwell with God, protection becomes less about escape and more about resilience. You may still face storms, but you are not internally shattered by them. You may walk through danger, but you are not defined by fear. The shelter of God reshapes not just your circumstances, but your capacity to endure them. Psalm 91 does not promise safety to the careless or comfort to the detached. It promises refuge to those who choose to stay, to remain, to dwell. And that choice is available every day, in every moment, through every decision. So, the question is not whether God is willing to protect you. The question is simpler and more personal. Where are you choosing to dwell today? After establishing where we dwell, Psalm 91 moves naturally to what no longer has authority over us, fear. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day. That statement is not a suggestion or a motivational slogan. It is a declaration of inner freedom. The psalm names fear directly because fear is not just an emotion, it is a governing force. Left unchecked, it shapes perception, decision, making, and identity. Scripture confronts fear, not by pretending danger does not exist, but by redefining who is ultimately in control. Fear thrives in uncertainty. It feeds on what we cannot predict or manage. Night terror represents the unseen, the imagined, the thoughts that grow louder when the world goes quiet. The arrow, by day, represents visible threats, public pressures, and external opposition. By naming both, the psalm covers the full psychological landscape of fear, what haunts us privately and what challenges us openly. And then it does something radical. It removes fear's authority altogether. This is where faith becomes more than belief. It becomes shelter. Faith, in its truest sense, is not denial of reality, but clarity about reality. It recognizes danger without surrendering to it. When God becomes your refuge, fear loses its role as decision maker. You may still feel it, but it no longer commands you. There is a profound difference between experiencing fear and being governed by it. From a psychological perspective, fear narrows vision. It pulls the mind into survival mode, reducing life to immediate threats and worst case scenarios. Faith expands vision. It restores proportion. It reminds the mind that the present moment is not the final word. When the psalm says, 1,000 may fall at your side, it is not glorifying catastrophe. It is asserting stability amid chaos. The faithful mind is not insulated from reality. It is anchored within it. Philosophically, fear is rooted in the illusion of isolation. We are most afraid when we believe we are alone in facing what comes next. Psalm 91 dismantles that illusion. It insists on presence, God's presence, constant and attentive. Fear diminishes when companionship is assured. This is why courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of trust. The psalm does not promise a fear-free world. It promises a God-filled one. Faith, as shelter, also changes how we interpret outcomes. Without faith, adversity feels like evidence of abandonment. With faith, adversity becomes a context for endurance. Fear says, "This will destroy you." Faith says, "This will not define you." One contracts the soul, the other strengthens it. Over time, faith-trained minds respond differently to pressure. They pause instead of panic. They discern instead of react. Importantly, Psalm 91 does not suggest recklessness. You will not fear does not mean you ignore wisdom or responsibility. It means fear no longer dictates your values or compromises your integrity. You act with discernment, not desperation. Faith does not make you careless, it makes you steady. There is also a moral dimension here. Fear often pushes people into silence, conformity, or compromise. It keeps truth unspoken and convictions hidden. Faith frees the conscience. When fear loses power, courage takes its place. Not loud or aggressive courage, but quiet resolve. The kind that allows a person to stand firm without bitterness and move forward without resentment. What Psalm 91 ultimately offers is not bravado, but peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on circumstances, but the durable peace that rests on trust. This peace does not deny danger. It outlasts it. It is the calm of a soul that knows where it belongs and who holds it. So if fear has been shaping your decisions, your silence, or your hesitation, hear the promise clearly. Fear is not your shelter. Faith is, and when faith becomes your refuge, fear no longer gets the final word. As Psalm 91 continues, something subtle but deeply reassuring takes place. The language shifts from broad assurance to intimate detail. Protection is no longer spoken of in general terms, it becomes personal. He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. That word "you" changes everything. It tells us that God's care is not an abstract system or a distant force operating on principles alone. It is deliberate, attentive, and individualized. We live in a world that often treats people as numbers, points, statistics, or passing faces in a crowd. That mindset quietly seeps into how many view God. Powerful, yes, but impersonal. Sovereign, yet detached. Psalm 91 dismantles that idea. It presents a God who knows where you walk, how you think, and what you carry silently. Protection in this psalm is not mass-produced, it is tailored. Psychologically, this speaks directly to the human need for significance. One of the deepest anxieties people carry is the fear of being unseen, of suffering unnoticed, of struggling without acknowledgement. When the psalm speaks of angels assigned to guard you, it affirms presence and attention. This is not sentimentality, it is grounding. The belief that one's life matters stabilizes the mind and strengthens resilience. People endure hardship differently when they know they are not overlooked. Philosophically, personal protection challenges the idea that life is governed purely by chance. It introduces intentionality into existence. This does not mean every event is orchestrated to our liking, but it does mean nothing is meaningless. There is a difference between randomness and mystery. Psalm 91 leans toward mystery, a reality in which unseen order exists even when visible order seems fragile. This psalm also speaks of God bearing us up, so that we do not strike our foot against a stone. This image suggests not only rescue from catastrophe, but protection in the ordinary. Many people imagine divine intervention only in dramatic moments, yet most harm, most regret, and most loss come from small missteps, subtle decisions, and overlooked moments. God's protection operates in these quiet spaces, redirecting a conversation, delaying a meeting, stirring unease before a harmful choice. Much of God's work happens unnoticed, and that is part of its grace. This understanding reshapes how we interpret near misses and unexplained delays. What we often label as inconvenience may be intervention. What feels like a closed door may be protection. Faith does not require us to see every reason, but it invites us to trust the care behind the outcome. Over time, this trust cultivates humility. We learn that not every success is self-made and not every avoided disaster is luck. There is also responsibility embedded in this promise. The psalm says angels guard you in all your ways. That implies movement, obedience, and direction. God's protection is not passive. It accompanies those who are walking with purpose. It does not endorse reckless living, but it supports faithful living. Personal protection is not a license for arrogance. It is an invitation to trust. This truth also transforms how we face uncertainty. When protection is understood as personal, anxiety about the future softens. The question shifts from what will happen to me to who is walking with me. That shift changes everything. Fear loses its grip when companionship is assured. Courage grows not from confidence in ourselves, but from confidence in God's nearness. Psalm 91 does not promise that you will understand every moment of your life. It promises that you will not be alone in any of them. Protection here is not simply about survival. It is about care. It is the assurance that your life is held, watched, and guided even when you cannot trace the hand that leads you. So when the world makes you feel small, forgotten, or expendable, remember this: God's protection has your name on it. And a life entrusted to that truth is a life lived with quiet strength, steady purpose, and unshakable hope. As Psalm 91 unfolds, it becomes clear that divine protection does not mean a life free from confrontation. The psalm speaks plainly of lions and serpents, of plague and adversity. These images are not symbolic decorations. They represent real threats, real resistance, and real hardship. What is striking is not that danger exists, but that the promise of God's protection is spoken in the presence of it. Scripture does not offer escape from the battlefield. It offers victory within it. This distinction is essential, because many people quietly abandon faith when life becomes difficult, assuming that hardship signals absence. But Psalm 91 corrects that assumption. It does not say you will never encounter trouble. It says you will not be overcome by it. You will tread upon the lion and the cobra. Notice the posture. You are not running from danger. You are standing over it. Protection here is not avoidance. It is authority. Psychologically, this reframes how adversity is processed. When difficulty is interpreted as punishment or abandonment, it breeds despair. But when difficulty is understood as a proving ground, it builds resilience. The human mind needs meaning to endure pressure. Faith supplies that meaning. It tells us that hardship is not random cruelty, but part of a larger formation. We are not merely surviving trials, we are being shaped through them. Philosophically, this challenges the modern belief that a good life is a painless one. Comfort has become our highest value, yet comfort rarely produces strength. Psalm 91 suggests a deeper good, transformation through trust. The presence of danger does not negate God's protection. It reveals it. Victory is not proven in the absence of opposition, but in the ability to move through it without losing one's soul. The imagery of trampling threats underfoot is especially powerful. It implies progress. You do not defeat danger by standing still. You overcome it by moving forward. Faith does not freeze you in fear. It propels you into action. Many people are not defeated by what they face, but by what they refuse to face. God's protection gives courage not to retreat, but to advance wisely. This also corrects a subtle misunderstanding about strength. Strength in biblical terms is not self-reliance. It is God-reliance. The psalm does not glorify human bravery apart from God. It portrays courage as the natural outcome of trust. When you know you are protected, you move differently. You speak differently. You endure differently. Confidence grows not from certainty of outcome, but from certainty of presence. There is also a moral clarity here. Trials expose what we truly trust. When pressure comes, shallow beliefs collapse, but deep convictions endure. Psalm 91 invites believers to see challenges as opportunities to practice faith, not as excuses to abandon it. Every confrontation becomes a moment of decision. Will fear define the narrative, or will trust? Importantly, the psalm does not promise immediate resolution. Victory may be gradual. Some battles are won in a moment, others are won over time. God's protection does not always remove the struggle quickly, but it sustains the believer faithfully. This kind of endurance reshapes character. It produces patience, humility, and perseverance, qualities that cannot be learned in comfort. When we view life through this lens, suffering loses its power to embitter. It may wound, but it does not destroy. It may test, but it does not erase purpose. Faith transforms the battlefield into a classroom where trust is strengthened and dependence is deepened. Psalm 91 reminds us that protection is not proven by what we avoid, but by what we overcome. You are not shielded from every storm, but you are upheld in everyone. And when you emerge, you do not merely survive. You stand stronger, steadier, and more anchored than before. So, if you are facing resistance today, do not interpret it as defeat. See it as the ground on which God intends to demonstrate his faithfulness. Because protection is not the absence of trouble, it is the certainty of victory through it. As Psalm 91 draws closer to its conclusion, the voice shifts again. This time, God speaks directly. Because he loves me, God says, I will deliver him, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. He will call on me, and I will answer him. This moment is crucial because it reveals the relational core behind every promise. God's protection is not mechanical or distant, it is responsive. It is activated by trust, expressed through relationship, and revealed through response. Notice the order. Love comes first, then deliverance. Acknowledgement precedes protection. Calling comes before answering. This is not a transactional formula, it is a relational rhythm. God is not bargaining with humanity, he is responding to it. Protection flows not from perfection, but from connection. What God honors here is not flawless behavior, but a heart turned toward him. Psychologically, this addresses a common struggle, the fear that reaching out reveals weakness. Many people hesitate to call on God because they believe self-reliance is strength. But Scripture teaches the opposite. Dependence, rightly placed, is strength. To call on God is not to admit defeat. It is to recognize reality. Human beings are finite. When we accept that truth, we stop exhausting ourselves trying to carry what we were never meant to bear alone. Faith changes the posture of the mind. Instead of internalizing every problem, it externalizes trust. Instead of rehearsing fear, it rehearses reliance. Calling on God interrupts isolation. It breaks the psychological loop of self-talk and replaces it with dialogue. This is why prayer is not merely spiritual discipline, it is emotional realignment. When you speak to God, you stop speaking only to yourself. Philosophically, God's promise to answer challenges the idea that the universe is silent or indifferent. Psalm 91 insists that reality is responsive, that there is a listening presence behind existence. This does not mean every prayer is answered the way we expect, but it does mean no prayer is ignored. God's answers may come as strength instead of escape, clarity instead of certainty, endurance instead of explanation. But response is guaranteed. There is also a profound dignity in this promise. God does not say, "He will perform for me, and I will rescue him." He says, "He loves me." Love here implies trust, loyalty, and recognition. It is the quiet decision to place confidence in God's character, even when circumstances remain unresolved. That kind of love produces resilience. It anchors the soul during delay and disappointment. When God says, "I will be with him in trouble," he does not minimize suffering. He enters it. This is perhaps the most reassuring promise of all. Deliverance does not always mean removal. Sometimes it means companionship. There are moments when escape would weaken us, but presence strengthens us. God's nearness does what answers alone cannot do. It sustains identity and preserves hope. This changes how believers interpret waiting. Waiting is no longer abandonment. It becomes formation. Silence is no longer absence. It becomes space for trust. Faith matures when we learn to believe that God is working even when we cannot trace his hand. That belief steadies the heart and guards against despair. Calling on God also reshapes responsibility. Trust does not eliminate action, it clarifies it. When we rely on God, we act with humility instead of panic. with patience instead of urgency. We make decisions informed by faith rather than driven by fear. Over time, this produces a life marked by steadiness rather than volatility. Psalm 91 teaches that God does not distance himself from those who trust him. He draws nearer. Love invites protection. Calling invites response. Relationship invites presence. This is not a promise reserved for the extraordinary. It is extended to anyone willing to trust. So if you are standing in uncertainty, do not withdraw into silence. Call on God, not because you have everything figured out, but because you know who does. Because when trust speaks, God listens. And when God responds, deliverance is never far behind. As Psalm 91 reaches its final promise, it lifts our vision beyond immediate rescue and momentary safety towards something far more comprehensive. God declares, "With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation." This is not merely a promise of extended years. It is a promise of fulfilled purpose. Protection in its fullest sense is not about prolonging existence without meaning. It is about preserving a life until it has accomplished what it was meant to accomplish. The phrase long life in Scripture is never just numerical. It speaks of a life lived under divine covering, a life not prematurely cut short by fear, recklessness, or despair. Psychologically, many people age before their time because they live under constant stress, anxiety, and unresolved fear. Faith, by contrast, brings integration. It aligns the inner world, producing peace that sustains the body and steadies the mind. A protected life is often a balanced one, grounded, resilient, and directed. To satisfy him is equally important. Satisfaction is not excess, it is completeness. Modern culture confuses satisfaction with accumulation, yet remains perpetually restless. Psalm 91 speaks of a deeper fulfillment, the quiet knowledge that one's life has mattered. This kind of satisfaction cannot be rushed. It emerges over time through obedience, trust, and perseverance. It is the result of walking with God long enough to see his faithfulness unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Philosophically, this promise reframes success. Success is no longer measured solely by achievement or recognition, but by alignment with purpose. A long life without meaning is exhausting. A purposeful life, even amid difficulty, is sustaining. God's protection ensures not only survival, but direction. It keeps a person from being consumed by distractions that waste energy and derail calling. Protection here is guidance as much as it is defense. The final phrase, "show him my salvation," brings everything into focus. Salvation is not limited to a future event. It is a present reality unfolding over a lifetime. It includes deliverance from fear, restoration of identity, and reconciliation with God. To see salvation is to recognize God's hand at work not only in crises, but in growth, maturity, and transformation. This vision reshapes how we understand time. Each season becomes meaningful. Youth is no longer rushed, and age is no longer feared. Every stage serves a purpose. God's protection does not freeze us in one moment of blessing. It carries us faithfully through changing seasons, ensuring that nothing essential is lost along the way. There is also a quiet warning embedded here. A protected life is not a passive one. Longevity and satisfaction are not granted for comfort alone, but for stewardship. If God preserves a life, it is because that life still has something to give: wisdom, compassion, testimony, or service. Protection extends not just for our sake, but for the sake of others we are meant to influence. This understanding invites reflection. Are we living merely to endure, or are we living to fulfill? Are we simply asking God to keep us safe, or are we asking Him to make our lives meaningful? Psalm 91 invites us to see protection as partnership. God covers us so that we can walk boldly, love deeply, and serve faithfully. When you trust God with your life, you begin to live it differently. Fear loosens its grip. Urgency gives way to patience. You stop rushing to prove your worth and start living from a sense of calling. Protection, in this sense, becomes freedom. The freedom to live fully without being ruled by anxiety about the future. Psalm 91 does not end with fear avoided, but with purpose fulfilled. It assures us that a life placed in God's hands will not be wasted, cut short, or left unfinished. So, as you step forward, remember this. God's protection is not just about keeping you alive. It is about making sure your life counts. And a life that counts is a life worth trusting Him with completely.